Minister Hadju, a former auditor for the Indigenous Procurement Program has stated that your Liberal government was warned about specific cases of alleged fraud. He said the government hamstrung auditors and repeatedly ignored warnings that the program was being abused by non-Indigenous companies. Why did you ignore the auditor's warnings?
Well, first of all, I was deeply concerned to hear of this weekend. It was the first I heard of this allegation, and it took immediate action with the department, and I am calling for a full external audit of the program.
A full external audit. In the case that's been outlined in the remarks of the former auditor, we see that having the government check its own work is not actually oversight. Are you able to tell us at whose direction Indigenous Services Canada determined that the department would take on full responsibility for confirming the eligibility of Indigenous businesses for the program after 2021?
Well, what I can say is, first of all, I just want to thank you for the question, and it's clear by your question that we agree that a 5% procurement target is important and that we need to ensure that any program like this has integrity. So I appreciate the question. And I agree with you that if we don't have integrity of this program, that we're not actually going to be able to satisfy not just Canadians, but Indigenous people that a program like this is actually working to their goals. What I can say is that the company that was contracted by Indigenous Services Canada to do this work has made these allegations. They're very serious. As I said, I'm extremely concerned. I found out about these concerns this weekend and took immediate action to call for an external audit. The department is working now on what that will look like and will come back to me with a plan.
Minister, is it your belief today that the program has integrity?
It is my belief that there are many aspects of the program that are delivering for Indigenous companies. But look, even some misuse of the program puts the program at risk. And so for me, an allegation like that auditor has made is very serious. And I think we should all take it seriously and we should act on it.
Minister Duclos, were you aware of Randy Boissonnault's claims of Indigenous heritage that were echoed and promoted by the Liberal Party of Canada, both on their social media and in fundraising efforts? Were you aware that he had made those claims?
Comme vous, je suis l'actualité.
Like you, I read the news, I listen to my colleagues' remarks, and like you, or maybe less than you, because last week we heard MP Randy Boissonnault speak about that issue.
Fundraised off of what was a false claim. It was a lie that had been put forward. Now, if the lie was not Mr. Boissonnault, and Mr. Boissonnault claims it wasn't him who told the lie, in which case that would rest with the Liberal Party. They fundraised off it, and we've seen multiple instances now where they're trying to, the Liberal Party is trying to cover this up. Media has continued to report more and more revelations that what Mr. Boissonnault says and what is true are often very different things. Do you think that Canadians should be concerned that the Liberal Party of Canada fundraised off of what we now know to be a lie, where Mr. Boissonnault had claimed to have Indigenous heritage, and that he used that same, his company used that same false claim in an attempt to disenfranchise Indigenous-owned businesses and win contracts under that false pretense?
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Carr, point of order.
Yeah, just perhaps the record can show, I think we established quite clearly last meeting when Mr. Boissonnault was present that he did not claim
That's not a point of order.
Heritage, nor did he at any point. So perhaps my colleagues across the way, when making such insinuations, can be mindful of what the facts show.
Well, on that point of order, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. Point of order, Mr. Barrett.
Yeah, as you well know, Mr. Carr's intervention is not a point of order. It does not reference any standing order. It's simply debate in an attempt to interrupt the proceedings. I was very respectful in my exchange in offering time to the ministers. What I'd ask is that Liberal members be as respectful, even if they're trying to cover for what is shameful behavior by the Liberal member for Edmonton, Randy Boissonnault, and his
point of order,
lies
Mr.
and
Chair.
false claims.
Same point of order.
So, thank you, Mr. Barrett. We're quickly getting into debate here, but Mr. Card, do you have a point of order? That you're...
Just very quickly on the same point of order, Mr. Barrett, I believe, began referencing shameful behavior and other allegations, which I don't think are actually points of order. Just for reference, thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Card. Let's get back to asking the questions that we're all here to hear the testimony of the ministers. I'm going to turn the floor back over to Mr. Barrett. You have a little bit more than 2 minutes left. I'd stop the clock, and so I'll hand the floor back to you, Mr. Barrett.
Before your Liberal colleague attempted to interfere to cover up for the shameful behavior and lies of Liberal MP Randy Boissonnault with respect to his claims to Indigenous heritage and attempting to defraud Indigenous-owned businesses of their ability to get government contracts, and the Liberal Party of Canada promoting that lie in an attempt to raise funds off that false claim. Minister, do you think that behavior is appropriate and that Canadians should be concerned with the Liberal Party's actions in this case?
I'm not the chair of this committee, so I cannot determine whether MP Carr's intervention was a point of order. But what I know is that what he said was correct. No, making false allegations, making all sorts of falsehoods sound true because they're all compiled together is not a fair treatment of the facts, and I would suggest again that you get back to what the MP Boissonnault said to you just last week, and you ask him those questions if you think they are relevant.
So what we know
important.
to be true, Minister, is that every time that Mr. Boissonnault came before a standing committee, that what he said was later proven to be not true, that he has demonstrated himself to be someone who is not truthful or honest. So we can't refer to Mr. Boissonnault's testimony as what is honest or right. What we know, the facts are, that the Liberal Party of Canada promoted what was a false claim about Randy Boissonnault's Indigenous heritage. This was my question to you. Your party, sir, the Liberal Party fundraised off of what we know to be not true. And Canadians are, of course, concerned about this. This type of dishonesty borders on corruption when Canadians don't know what the government has said, whether or not it's true or it's not true. Should Canadians be concerned with the actions of your party when we know that one of your former cabinet colleagues showed a pattern for dishonesty and lies up to and including...
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I believe Mr. Barrett is an experienced...
Point of order, Mr. Carr.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Mr. Barrett's an experienced parliamentarian. He knows that he can't refer to a member's behavior as lying. In fact, my Conservative colleagues across the way did this on multiple occasions last meeting, and in fact, it was a Conservative chair that correctly ruled at that moment in time that that was unparliamentary language. He should apologize and withdraw that comment. Thank you.
We are at the end of this time, but I want to give Minister Duclos an opportunity to respond.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je vais juste répéter.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to repeat in French what I said in English a few minutes. Amalgamating various things that might seem true at a very high level, but that are collectively wrong is not a good way of proceeding. I would propose that the MP continues his discussion with the MP in question.
To our Mr. Genuis, you have 5 minutes.
The Globe and Mail has a shocking story today about abuse of the Indigenous Procurement Program by the Canadian Healthcare Agency. According to a whistleblower, the government was putting in place tight constraints on the work of auditors as soon as they started to identify serious problems. The government was warned by auditors, and their response to those warnings was to make life more difficult for the auditors. Minister, you told my colleague Michael Barrett that you only heard about allegations against Canadian Healthcare Agency this weekend. Is that correct?
No, I did not. I told your colleague that I was made aware of the auditor's concerns overall about the program this weekend, and that it was deeply distressing to me, and that I...
But you were previously aware of his allegations against Canadian Healthcare Agency?
What I'm saying is that that was the first I heard of Mr. Hartle's allegations.
When did you first become aware of concerns about the indigeneity of this partnership involving the Canadian Healthcare Agency? When did you first become aware of that?
The department routinely reviews, as you've heard before.
When did you first become aware? It's not about the department. When did you first become aware?
As I said, this weekend, I too heard about what was in the Globe and Mail, and I was
But when did
deeply
you first
concerned.
become aware of concerns about the Canadian Healthcare Agency?
I think you've asked questions about this company before, have you not?
So when did you first become aware of it, though?
So the first time I became aware of it was, I don't have an exact date, but a few months ago.
A few months ago. Minister, you said in response to my questions that, quote, I would say that it was an abuse of being on the list without adequate representation. You said this about Canadian Healthcare Agency back at the end of October, and you've tried to represent the facts in a very different way to my colleague, Mr. Barrett, which is disappointing to say the least. The AFN has said that
I could respond to that because that is actually putting words in my mouth, and that is not what I said.
Can I have the time, Mr. Chair? I've got another question.
So, Mr. Genius, you do have the time, and the
Thank
minister
you.
will have an opportunity to respond to that.
Okay, I have 3 minutes left. The AFN says that you're not hitting your 5% target. It's closer to 1%. That's what Chief Joanna Bernard told the Government Operations Committee. Is the AFN correct?
Not according to our records, but what I can say is that I understand the concern, and I'm actually, as I said to your colleague, glad that the Conservative Party is fighting so hard to protect this 5% procurement target. This is good news. It means that we all want this program to work better, incling the AFN.
You're not answering my question, and you were somewhat inaccurate in your response with Mr. Barrett. So you don't agree with the AFN, I understand.
I would say that our data is different than the AFN's, and that, in fact, in some departments, we are exceeding the procurement target of 5%.
You're either hitting it or you're not. It's not as if the AFN is experiencing things differently, right? You're either hitting the 1% or you're hitting a 5%.
Well, what I would say is that our data demonstrates that we are actually hitting our procurement target amongst
your data
a number
also
of different
shows,
departments.
Madam Minister, that you're dramatically purging the Indigenous business list. That since 2022, you've taken over 1,000 companies off that list. You've taken over 100 companies off this year alone. And I'm trying to square the fact that, on the one hand, not a single person or company has been penalized for Indigenous identity fraud, but on the other hand, you're dramatically purging the list, which suggests that there's some people on that list that shouldn't be on that list. How do you square the fact that Indigenous leaders across the board are saying that abuse of this program is rampant? You're taking many companies off the list, and yet nobody's been held accountable for Indigenous identity fraud.
Well, actually, what I would say is that Indigenous peoples are saying that economic reconciliation and the work of the Government of Canada in terms of its procurement target is actually changing realities for Indigenous businesses across the country. But
Sorry,
I would
Minister,
say
could
that
you just
I agree
answer the
with
question?
you, Mr.
Is it acceptable that nobody's been held accountable for Indigenous identity fraud by your government?
What I would say is it's great that you care about this program
Could you answer
to the
the
degree
question?
that you do. Because what we all agree,
Is it acceptable
what we
to
all
you
agree about,
that nobody has been
Mr.
held
Chair, point of
accountable?
order.
I can't answer the question, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Carr.
Just a problem we've run into previously, but very difficult for us to have translation services provided adequately when there's talking back and forth. So perhaps we could just resettle things. Thank you.
Yeah, just on the same point of order, I agree with Mr. Carr. I'm trying to ask questions, and the minister is not answering them, and I think should be brought to order. I've got 30 seconds left. And I'd just like to know whether she thinks it's acceptable.
Garnett, before doing that, I just want to remind members here not to talk over the witnesses. We want to make sure we're avoiding the crosstalk. It makes it very difficult for the interpreters to do their work, and for members that have challenges hearing as well. So just want to remind members to do that.
Et,
and
Monsieur le
witnesses.
Président, c'était les deux voix que j'ai entendues. Alors.
So I heard many voices.
30 seconds, I'll try one more time, Minister. Nobody has been held accountable by your government for Indigenous identity fraud. Meanwhile, you've taken Canadian Healthcare Agency off the list, and you can't tell me why. You've taken Dalian Enterprises off the list, and you can't tell me why. You've taken over 1,000 companies off the list, yet nobody's been held accountable for it. Is it acceptable to you that not a single company has ever been held accountable for Indigenous identity fraud by your government?
It appears to me that I have answered your question, and I have answered your question repeatedly. But I will tell you that removals from the list are, for many reasons, that can be quite benign. For example, businesses could be closed. They could be non-responsive to requests from the department.
1,000
There
businesses
could
are
be,
suddenly non-responsive?
Changes in the business ownership structure. There could be a number of different reasons.
Okay.
And
Could you provide a breakdown of those reasons for each of those companies?
So,
Appel au règlement. Appel au règlement, Monsieur Carr.
Point of order. Yes, again, it's very, very difficult to hear in both official languages. We do have Francophone members and other people listening in both languages. So, Chair, I hope that our colleagues can try to apply the rules in a better way. Thank you. Mr. Carr, the time has run out for Mr. Genuis.
We're moving into the third round, starting with Mr. Genuis for 5 minutes.
Chair, Indigenous leaders have said that Indigenous identity fraud is rampant in this program, but no one has been held accountable. And I want to come back to that. Nobody has been held accountable by the government for Indigenous identity fraud. And let's zero in on one famous example, MP Randy Boissonnault. Now, his company, Global Health Imports, misrepresented their Indigenous identity. We know that now. There's no debate. They made a claim to be Indigenous. That claim was false. First question, has the Indigenous identity fraud of Randy Boissonnault's company been referred to the RCMP?
So I believe I answered this question at my last committee appearance just a few weeks ago. The company in question, GHI, was never on the Indigenous Business Procurement list, and I believe Minister Duclos has additional information about.
Yeah, just before you chime in, Mr. Duclos, my question is very specific. We know they engage in Indigenous identity fraud in order to increase their chance of getting business from the government. That's fraud. Has this case been referred to the RCMP?
Monsieur le député Genuis, je pense qu'avant...
Mr. MP Genuis, I think when we describe things, we have to be careful of the language that we use. You've said it's a fraud. You would need to prove this, and I can assure you that if there had been fraud, there is in the government, in an independent way, mechanisms to ensure that these cases of fraud be dealt with in the proper manner.
Referring to the RCMP, but I am a bit struck, Mr. Duclos, that you think I should be careful saying that they committed fraud. They claim to be an Indigenous-owned business. They are not an Indigenous-owned business, but in the process of pursuing a contract with the Government of Canada, they falsely claim to be Indigenous. How is there any doubt about whether or not that is fraudulent?
Ce n'est pas aux politiciens comme nous sommes de déterminer...
It's not up to politicians that we are to determine whether there's any fraud.
En cours de justice artificielle, je pense qu'on doit faire confiance aux experts.
I think we have to trust the experts. Mr. Carr, it's really difficult to hear the minister.
Like he wasn't answering the question, I jumped in.
Monsieur le Président, je pense que...
This farce is not allowed to go on at any other committee, Mr. Chair. So can you tell them to be quiet and let people actually do their work?
Mr. Genuis, the witness, the minister, was in the middle of answering the question that you asked. And then before he could actually get to the answer, you interrupted him. I understand that there are times where you want to ask a pointed question, and that is very much the practice and procedure of committees, but it's very important that we don't have the crosstalk because of the interpretation and also because of members that might have challenges hearing. So I just want to remind members not to be cross-talking because of the health impacts, which we've been warned about many times on committees and in the House. But with that, Mr. Genuis, you have a little,
yes,
2 minutes and 45
seconds. So I'll just give the minister one more chance to answer the question. You have a company that I think quite clearly engaged in Indigenous identity fraud. You might say, well, maybe it wasn't quite fraud. Maybe they just lied in order to try to steal money from the taxpayers, but it wasn't really fraud. Have you referred information about this case to the RCMP?
Je dirais qu'il y a le droit et la responsabilité. Vous avez...
You have the right to your opinions, and we have the responsibility of validating whether there is fraud, and that responsibility has been put into operation in an independently, a politically independent way.
Were you responsible for terminating the government's contract with Round Point Consulting?
Pardon me. The contract with Round Point Consulting was terminated by the contracting authorities of Indigenous Services Canada, as the contracting authorities would in
So
any situation.
who made that decision?
It was any decision to terminate would be between the program authority, which is who I am,
Okay.
and the
so-
contracting
So
authority.
you made the decision?
Sorry?
So you made the decision?
So it's a joint decision
Okay.
between myself and contracting authorities.
Why was that decision made?
The decision was made because the work that was being done under that contract had changed significantly from when it was put in place, and the statement of work that had been used to award that contract no longer reflected accurately what the contractors were doing, and the work essentially had diminished and was not required.
Okay, they were in the middle of doing an audit into Canadian Healthcare Agency, and according to reports in the Globe and Mail, the government, so you, told them to no longer look into indigeneity claims of companies. Is that true?
Stated is not factual.
Is the Globe and Mail story correct?
The audit was done in 2016. The termination of the contract occurred in 2023, and the changes to the process, including who was verifying indigeneity, occurred in 2022.
Is there anything in the Globe and Mail story on this that you dispute?
Yes.
It's to you.
I think that sometimes people, their opinions reflected in that article reflect the opinions of Mr. Gary Hardle.
Is there anything in the article that you dispute?
I think, Mr. Chair, the
no,
official
my
has-
questions are for Ms.
I am the minister, and I
Sultan.
get to direct how the questions are
No, you
answered
don't.
and asked.
No,
Actually,
you don't
I do.
actually. You don't.
I do.
Stop. Do,
So, Mr. Genuis, your
you know,
time is ready.
Mr. Chair, it's obvious what you're trying to do. That the official responsible for this didn't want to answer the question, so the minister jumped in to prevent her from needing to answer it. It's obvious to everyone what's going on.
That is not accurate, Mr. Chair, and the member of parliament is, I would say, has asked the question, has received an answer, and what I would also say is that he
Yeah.
asked this question of me earlier, and I
Yeah.
have given him a clear answer.
Mr.
And
Chair,
I think
who has the
that,
floor?
you know, Mr. Chair, that it's unfortunate that civil
I
servants
asked a question
are
of
being
an
treated this way.
official about
Mr.
very
Genuis?
serious allegations, and I didn't get an answer.
So, Mr. Genuis, your time has elapsed here.
Yeah.
There will likely be another opportunity to ask a question.
Well,
Well,
that is very revealing, Chair, and everybody
to
saw what happened, that the official refused to answer the question, and the minister
Mr.
jumped in to
Genuis,
try to save her.
We're moving
Actually,
on.
that's not accurate, Mr. Chair, and the
Monsieur le
official
Président,
would
That's
like to
exactly
speak
what
at
happened.
this
Wait,
point.
S'il vous plaît.
Mr. Chair, this is not respectful of officials that are working on behalf of Canadians.
I'll give the official the opportunity to answer this, but we're over time here, and then we're moving on.
Point of order.
But first, we have a point of order from Mr. McLeod.
Mr. Chair, you're allowing people to speak over each other. I have a hearing issue. Today I brought my device for captions, and I'm still struggling to follow because there's too many voices coming on. If we could just restrict it to whoever's on the microphone, be greatly appreciated.
Thank you for reminding members, Mr. McLeod. Of course, we need to limit the crosstalk here, both for interpretation and people that have hearing challenges. And I see on the same point of order, we have Monsieur Lemire.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je voudrais aussi
Thank you, Chair. I also want to repeat that for Francophones who are listening to the debate, the interpretation is fundamentally important, and to speak over witnesses decreases the understanding we can have of the debate. I thank the interpreters for their patience and their dedication, and several times they've said that it's very difficult to interpret. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Lemire.
Just a very brief answer from Ms. Sultan. and then we'll be moving on to Mr. Batiste.
Thank you for the opportunity to respond. I think that the allegations in that article are very troubling and need to be taken very seriously. There are multiple pieces of information in that article with which I disagree and have a different point of view.